I've got the fantastic task today to bring you to the incredible Underbank Reservoir, where I'm going to teach you not to be scared of these big waters, because they can be quite daunting. But apart from a few pike that maybe will chase a few fish in today, there's nothing really scary about them if you gear up properly and approach them in the right way. A little bit more forgiving than the standard Superior X. I think so. I've just had a bite. That's great. That's great news. That is my preferred feeder when it comes to fishing for skimmers. When we rocked up this morning, as we got onto the bank, the cameraman turned to me and literally said, wow, what a place to come fishing. Just look at it. An incredible place to sit and fish on a wonderful day, whether it be in a match or a pleasure session. So the name of the game today is to show you that if you get your gear right, get things nicely balanced, then you can catch a lot of fish or just have a fantastic day on these wonderful waters. Now, before we look at the tackle, why don't we have a little look at the bait? Because bait selection doesn't need to be too overly complicated as far as I'm concerned. First of all, ground bait, I've gone with F1 green. Now, when I come to some of these reservoirs, if I think they're heavily fished and carp anglers come on, I'd probably want a slightly stronger fish meal ground bait. I'd want like some marine green in there, perhaps making it a bit stronger. But these venues, or this particular venue, doesn't get heavily carp fished or anything like that, apart from a few pleasure anglers and odd match. So I like to go for like a more balanced F1 green, a fish meal ground bait without being overly strong. Make sure you wet it up slightly on the damp side. You don't want it to be dry, because obviously a lot of these venues are quite deep, and I don't think there's any place for dry ground baits wafting up in the water. Everything needs to be basically absorb plenty of water, so anything that comes off your feeder does go down and sink down properly to the bottom. Don't be having your ground bait too dry. Then I would never go to a reservoir without worms. For me, I would always have at least half a kilo of worms with me. I believe that they're a superb bait, really attractive to the fish, and something that every single res I've ever been on is basically the one bait that catches me the most fish, to the point where I've then brought with me a pint of maggots. Now, you could bring some casters, but when I got the brief through about today, it was basically trying to show you guys how easy it can be to go fishing on these venues. So what I didn't want to do is confuse you with loads of casters and pinkies and corn and all those sorts of bait. Keep it nice and simple. Maggots and worms, you are going to catch lots of fish. These waters tend to hold fish like skimmers, perch, roach, hybrids. They seem to be the key species, and all those species absolutely love maggots and worms. So they're reliable baits that are going to catch me plenty of fish. I think once I've got my bait selection nicely sorted, it's then about the tackle. You can see my setup is super simple. My big side tray, I like to sit slightly in the water. There's something nice about sitting in the water, but I haven't got a platform today, just extending my box legs. And I've got a nice big side tray on the other side, which means I've got loads of space to put all my little bits and bobs for a nice day's fishing. Get yourself nice and comfy. That is always one of the first keys when you're on these big venues. Then it comes down to the tackle. So often you don't need to fish miles out on these venues to catch fish. You may hear the stories of, yeah, I fished 60, 70 meters, whacked it into the middle of the lake. There's no doubt on some venues that works, but on a lot of these places you can get regular bites from all the different species at a very comfortable distance. So I've gone for about 30-35 meters today, and because it's around about, I don't know, 12 to 14 foot deep where I'm fishing, and it comes up quite steeply towards me, I need a longish rod that's going to give me some control. When you go on a commercial, you might be fishing your 10-foot Superior X, chucking your method 30 meters. You're not going to do that on a bigger venue. You need a longer rod that's still got some control, but it means that if the wind gets up or things change and you need a heavier feeder, you can still cast it. So today I've gone for the 12-foot Superior Superlight. This Superior X Superlight is an incredible rod. It's got strength in the lower end, so I can cast big, large window feeders like this one that I've got on here and still have loads of control, but it's mega soft in the top section. So when we hook those beautiful roach and skimmers, we're going to hook them, the rod's going to bend and be nice and forgiving, and we're going to get in all the fish. It's going to be really, really fantastic. So this is a great choice of rod when you're on these sort of venues. Don't go for shorter rods. Longer but softer rods are something that can work fantastically well when you're fishing at those distances. Then the reel, the Extremity SD, 520 size because I'm fishing around 30 meters, a brilliant reel. As you know, I love the Extremities for so long, but this SD version with the speed drag and the adjusted handle is really a beautiful reel. So look, a really great combination. I also am a massive fan of fishing with braid. When you're on these big venues, I love the sensitivity that braid brings. I love the control that braid brings. And actually today I'm fishing braid direct. So I've got 010 absolute feeder braid on the reel, one of my favorite braids. And then I've just attached an 016 braid hook length. That's because if you actually look along the bank here, there's bits of shale, bits of rock. And when I'm fishing, obviously what's going to happen is that line by the feeder is going to be laying on or around those bits of shale on the bottom. So just by having something a little bit more durable in the 016, it means it's dead easy to do. I've literally gone up and down the rod with it. You don't even hear a braid to braid not go through your reel, so through your line. So it's nice having that braid shock leader on. Taking a little look at the rig and the feeders, let's talk about feeders first. I've got two types of feeder on my side tray today. One is a caged window feeder and the other one is a solid window feeder. Right, if you want to keep things ultra simple when you go out on big venues, then window feeders are the #1 choice. Nothing casts as well as a window feeder. They cast like an absolute bullet. They're easy to load and you can get varying presentation because this cage window is going to allow little bits to break off and draw fish into my peg, and then my solid window feeder, once I get a few fish there, is going to keep them nicely pinned down to the bottom where I can catch them. If I could take two feeders feeder fishing for the rest of my life, they would be it. And when you come on these big venues, you're keeping things nice and straightforward, the window feeders are perfect. You can see I've got a free running rig. Made myself a little link there. I like a longish link when I'm in deep water just because I want those fish to almost like rattle themselves on, if you like. And I've got my free running feeder rig. If you want to see that, go back on the Preston Innovations YouTube channel, type in Lee Kerry's tangle free feeder rig and you can have a little look at that feeder rig. Super easy to use. I always think you want a nice length below your feeder on a reservoir when the water's clear. I think the fish watch the bait fall down. So there you can see I've got like probably about 70 centimeters. I wouldn't be scared to make that longer as well as the session goes on. But there we've got a dead simple, straightforward setup. So once you've chosen where to fish, let's talk a little bit about that because that's really important. You want to be fishing, I always think you want different depths for different species, okay? So I tend to put a 1 ounce square bomb on my rig. Let's dig one out of here for you. There we go. So this 1 ounce square bomb is what I put on my link, chuck it out and I count it down to the bottom in seconds. Anything over or anything like under 4 seconds, I believe is a great roach and perch depth. Probably like 2.5 to 4 seconds. That's a great place to fish for roach. If I cast out and it was deeper than 4, I'd probably be thinking more skimmers and a few roach. And then if it was deeper than say 6, I'd be thinking, oh, bigger bream and hybrids. Basically, the deeper you go, the bigger the fish, but usually the less the fish. So I've picked a lovely area today where I've chucked out and my bomber's almost a 4 second. If I chuck it out 3 or 4 times, might be 4, 3.9, 4, that sort of thing. So I feel that's a depth where I've got a chance of an odd skimmer, and I've also got a great chance of some lovely roach and perch, because today is about getting some bites. I think that's a lovely depth. It's at 30 meters. What a great place to fish. So nothing too complicated at all, but that's what I look for when I'm chucking out into the water. All right, let's get started. I'm itching to get started. I want to get out and do some fishing. Let's show you guys what the fishing's all about. So I always kick off the session with that large window feeder. I basically want to cast out, I want to get some bait falling through the peg, I want some activity in the peg, and I'm going to cast really regular to start with. I'm just going to put my favourite, I've got a 16N30, so I'm just going to put my favourite hook bait, a single live red maggot on to start with. I'll probably end up fishing with worms most of the day throughout the day because they're so good, but my starting hook bait is always that single live red maggot. So you can see there he is crawling around, absolutely perfect. Now, when you're kicking the peg off, you don't want to go nuts with bait, all right? You basically want a little bit of live bait falling through the peg, and you want a bit of worm falling through the peg, and lots of ground bait. Let's draw these fish in. I'm going to have 1 minute chucks, okay? I'm not going to chuck in like 10 feederfuls. I'm just going to start fishing with 1 minute chucks. Sometimes on these venues, you chuck out and you get one first chuck. It's unbelievable, a massive expanse of water and you get one first chuck. So what I do is I literally get like a little blob of worms, right? Pop them in there. So there's like a dozen pieces of chopped worm, and then I get like the same sort of like 10 maggots, and then scoop them into the window feeder. So I'll try and do this in reverse for you so you can see, like literally just pushing the ground bait in like that. So I've got the bait in the feeder and then the ground bait at the front, and just give it, use your thumb there, look, just thumb that ground bait in. So that is almost going to be out of the feeder as it gets to the bottom. I've barely held that in, so let's just whack this out there and see what happens. So out she goes, rod in front of myself because it's deep. There's a lot of tension on the tip as it's sinking. I'm watching the tip, the feeder hits the bottom, drag that rod to keep everything nice and tight. I'm not moving the feeder at this point just because the water's deep. I'm just basically tightening up the line, and there we go, we're fishing. So literally, I'll look at my stopwatch. I don't even start and stop it to begin with, but I'm going to chuck this out for 1 minute. And all I do is if you look here, I'm gently turning the reel handle, gently, just picking up the slack line. And every now and again, my tip is doing slight movements as I pick it up. And then eventually the tip almost like doesn't drop back anymore. It's nice and tight. Do you know, I think I just had an indication. It's like it gets sort of slowly like tightens up. Maybe I'm getting excited. But the tip tightens, but then look, I've not put in a massive bend in the tip. There's tension in the tip, but not a big bend. These tips in these Superior X Super Lights have been done so they're a little bit more forgiving than the standard Superior X. I think so. I've just had a bite. That's great news. That's great news. So you can see that, I mean, literally, that is my first cast. I haven't cast anything. I haven't cast out today at all. It might be a perch or something like that. We'll see when it comes up. Perch or a roach, it feels like. It's a perch. I'm going to wind it in relatively quickly because there's lots of pike in here. So look, a perch to get me off and running. There it is. It even needs a disgorger on it. So a great sign. It just proves how many mouths there are in these venues. All right, and that's the main thing. There is lots of mouths. You've got to keep the fish fed. If you're waiting, if you're sort of like having 10-minute chucks, you're not gathering or bringing any fish into your peg. So I'm just going to put that single red maggot on again. I'm going to put a nice little flick of worms into my ground bait, I'm going to put a little flick of maggots into my ground bait and do it again. Now I would anticipate probably around 10 casts with this bigger feeder. So, you know, imagine if you just sat there and cast in 10 times with a large feeder, that would be a lovely setup. But what I'm actually doing is doing that a little bit more controlled. So those 10 casts will effectively help me build the swim in that early part of the session. I don't want, you can see how much tension I'm keeping in the tip, by the way, look. What I don't want to do is start putting my little feeder on too soon. I want to basically try and gather some fish into my peg. That's why I'm using that large window feeder. Probably only, like I say, only for about 10 casts. And that's going to keep creating something falling through the water, there'll be all particles, they'll be up in the water, down on the bottom. I don't care. All I'm trying to do is gather the fish early doors, trying to attract them to me. Don't forget, it's not a commercial where you're probably chucking onto a big volume of fish straight away. It doesn't surprise me to see perch first on the scene. They are your classic reservoir fish, to be honest. So basically, this early doors is just all about seeing what wants to come in, seeing what wants to gather. And that's why the braid is so important, because you need the sensitivity there. You need to be able to read your tips, see what's going on every single time. And while I'm waiting, I'll often just reach into my bait, get my next feeder full ready, put that little bit of worm ready there. Probably not the maggots because they'll crawl off. I'll just put the maggots in when it's time to fish. And we'll see if we can get some more bites. You know, it's a classic example, that first perch bite. Perch are really aggressive fish. You know, they're straight in on the bait. They're the ones that tend to come in straight away, and they'll gobble up everything that's in your peg, which is why that's why I don't like to put like 10 feederfuls in one go. Basically fill a load of fish up, and then you can potentially be left with like not a lot of bait in your peg. Whereas like by feeding it sort of like every cast, if you like, it means you're slowly building it up. So that's about a minute. Again, I don't want to wait this early part. I'm expecting to have 10 casts a minute long, probably take me about 15 to 20 minutes to do once I've wound in and refilled my feeder and etc, etc. So, you know, that's probably what's going to happen. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put 2 maggots on, something a bit more visual to begin with. So I'm going to put that second maggot through the thin end, drop a few maggots onto those worms, and fill up my feeder. Again, I'm not overly squeezing. This is all about just attracting a few fish into the peg to begin with. I'm trying to hit the same spot every time. I always pick a far bank marker and I'm trying to cast it there, but I've got to be honest, I actually don't mind an odd stray cast left or right in this early bit, especially when I've got that bigger feeder on. I'm just trying to build an area of which I'm going to fish on. So even though I am casting at a far bank marker, I'm sort of doing it a little bit haphazardly. You know, I want this area to hold fish rather than all down the same hole. I found a lot of the times where, you know, another indication, I'm really concentrating on being super accurate, and I end up actually not catching as many fish. I had that fish on there, but it's come off, which is very annoying. But yeah, I don't look to, you know, I've been too accurate in the past, and I just feel like the fish back off a bit quicker. So sometimes by having a little bit of a cast left or right, it could have been another perch, it gives you an opportunity to sort of search for a few fish. So look, let's do that again. Let's go for double maggot again. I mean, I've got a 16 on today, but on these big venues, don't be scared to put like a 14 or even like a 12 on. I fish a lot of the time with a size 12 on. these big open waters where the fish are wild, they just don't tend to be hook shy. So, you know, I've got 0.14 line on here, 0.14 to a 16, and I'd probably be even fishing 0.16 to a 12 maybe. You know, if the fishing gets good, I'll be putting a big hook on, let me assure you. So just bear that in mind as well. It's just, again, just keep your rod nice and low, sink all that line. And we've had a couple of indications already, which is a great sign, really is a great sign. You know, we've only had 3 casts, this is our 4th cast, so you can see just as I'm tightening the tip as well, on the tip itself, that tip is a lot softer than that normal superior tip. It's a tip that bends, you know, almost evenly, which is exactly what I want from when I'm fishing for small fish. I love my tip to almost like allow the bite to develop nicely. If the tip is, so if I show you this on the tip now, like if I get hold of the line, you can see that tip, look, it goes all the way around. There's not as much resistance, and I'm looking for a bite that basically develops like that as it goes round. And that sort of movement, by having that like slightly softer tip, or more, I'm gonna say, is it progressive, I suppose? You know, the trouble is, like sometimes on these big venues you can get a really strong toe, and that's when that sort of other type of tip, that fast taper tip, which is more sensitive at the top but stronger further down, they can be really good. You know, I do a lot of fishing at Southfield Reservoir, and you just wouldn't get away with that soft tip in. You would need that stiffer tip, because it tends to get a lot of toe. So this first early part is all about, all about being proactive. What we got here then? That feels a little bit more significant. There's a lot of pike in here, so I'm you do get, when you're on your own, if you're in a competition or there's a few people spread out, you don't tend to have as many problems with pike, but when you're on your own, sometimes pike can be a real nuisance. So this feels skimmery to me, which would be a great start to our day. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. It would also make me think about changing my feeder. So are we going to be a big perch or are we going to be a skimmer? Here we go. It's a skimmer. What a fantastic start to the session. There you go. So already our first skimmer has found us. Now, I'm a big believer that when the skimmers come into your peg, or when you've got some skimmers into your peg, you need to think about, excuse me, you need to think about changing your feeder. Now, on another day, I'd probably just stick with this feeder, and I'd probably use this feeder now for another 4 or 5 casts. But for the purpose of the video, I'm just going to change to that solid winder feeder now, because that is my preferred feeder when it comes to fishing for skimmers, only because I don't want those fish to rise up in the water. I don't really want them to come and start chasing my bait. So I love that, you know, I love that more solid winder feeder when I'm fishing that way. So because we've had a skimmer there, let's put the winder feeder on. So again, we're just going to do the same thing, same amount of bait, just going to literally get some worms, not many worms, get those maggots, put those maggots in there. And the difference with this feeder is once I scoop it into the feeder, I just gently, literally just gently thumb that in like that, give it a little squeeze. That is going to get to the bottom all in one piece. That previous feeder, the bait was going to break and drop on the way down, super attractive. This time, hopefully, the fish follow my feeder down to the bottom. It gets down to the bottom, I think, where's the bait, where's the bait? You catch them on your hook bait, and then as you wind in, your bait is released then on the bottom. You're almost fishing like a chuck behind, if you like. So it's really a fantastic way of fishing, but I can always put that cage winder feeder back on. Usually I tend to find I fish the cage winder feeder a lot because it's so attractive. This sort of like solid winder feeder can be good for catching like a few fish, but basically once you start fishing with this feeder, sometimes after you've caught 5 or 6 fish, you can often lose. Oh, look at that, an indication again straight away. You can often like find that, yeah, you catch 5 or 6 fish quickly and you've got to put that cage feeder back on. So that is the key to these big venues. It's about ringing the changes. It's about using the tools at your disposal and not being daunted. If the wind got up today, I would be putting those heavier feeders on, your 45, your 50 grams. I've got a nice selection here of all different weights of these window feeders. I've got light, heavy, small, large, extra large. You're the angler. You need to use all these things at your disposal. Go on, get round. Something there, something having a peck. You need to use all these things. You need to use the different feeders, the different weights, but don't be scared of them. They're such an easy place to fish, and we're going to have a great day's fishing today. I'm absolutely sure with the tactics I've shown you. And oh, missed a bite. What a way to finish, eh? Get out there, give it a go for yourself, because the fishing really can be unbelievable on venues like this.